Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on how to pitch to a podcast. And we have some amazing guests with us today. Our panelists today are Michelle Zacarias. She's an award-winning journalist and host of the Latino Newsletter Podcast. We also have Brenda Gonzalez, who's on the VPE team. She's a nonprofit capacity builder, providing strategic communications and fundraising and board leadership support to mission-focused organizations and causes. And she's also the creator of the Tamarindo Podcast. And also with us, we have Joaquín Cotler. Joaquín is a journalist and podcast producer who is currently the head of audio at the Latino Newsletter. So thank you for joining us. So let's get started. First, what I want to do is you all work on amazing podcasts and have some amazing experience. If you could just briefly tell us a little bit about the podcasts you work on currently. And let's start with Michelle first.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just want to thank you all for being here, for having me. Obviously my name's Michelle Zacarias. I use she, her pronouns. Yeah, so a little bit about the Latino Newsletter Podcast. It ties directly into the Latino Newsletter, which is a nonprofit, independent, like newsroom that focuses primarily on like amplifying voices of like underrepresented Latino communities through, high quality journalism, commentary, and different types of multimedia projects. So the podcast is a direct extension of that. And so what we do with the podcast is very directly related to that mission. We deliver stories and conversations through the Latino lens. And that looks like a lot of different things, right? That looks like having people come in who are Latino, having people who are, somehow directly reporting on Latino issues. Sometimes it's, someone who has like proximity to an issue or a cause or like a social movement. Just making sure that we are representing the plethora of diverse voices. And yeah, challenging some of the generalizations about the Latino community.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Let's go with Brenda. So tell us a little bit about your podcast, Brenda.
Yes, hi. I'm happy to be here wearing two hats, but I'll wear my Tamarindo hat right now. Tamarindo Podcast is actually celebrating 10 years in March. I can't believe it. So it started in response to the negative rhetoric that was very much prevalent about the Latino community back then. And we always wanted to be lighthearted and use kind of humor to call people in and talk about, the issues, talk about the issues that impact our community, but also just like feature and uplift true and accurate positive narratives about our community. So I've had a great opportunity to interview many change makers like Dolores Huerta, for instance, been featured by Oprah Magazine, and just have had a fabulous time creating this space where we can uplift our story. So yeah, that's a little bit about Tamarindo.
Great, thank you. And then Joaquin, so tell us a little about your backstory as well.
Well, I also work on Latino Newsletter Podcast. I am the producer. Michelle's the more forward-facing uh, person in the hot seat who's asking the tough questions. I've been doing mostly editing and some of the guest booking and stuff like that. What I think is interesting about being in a space like that is um, having a podcast as an extension of your newsroom is a way to kind of create an echo chamber that doesn't necessarily have to be about one specific topic or aspect of news. It's like a way to kind of deep dive on something that you might already be covering, and it's an interesting way to kind of change up the angle or to draw attention to something that might have been part of a larger article, and now you can do a 30-minute interview with somebody who was quoted twice in an article or something like that. My background is from audio journalism and podcasting. Also, I started with sort of narrative, long form features and series. And now with Latino Newsletter Podcast, we have a show that goes every 2 weeks, and we're also breaking ground on a narrative show that's going to drop in the summer, which is called American Colony, which will be the first narrative show published by Latino Newsletter. And it's about the history of the relationship between Puerto Rico and the mainland United States. So yeah, that's it. That's me.
Okay, no, that's great, and that's interesting too because as a communications professional, and we're seeing that podcasts are growing and there's a big interest for them as well. So, Brenda, I wanted to ask you, I know that podcasts are becoming more interesting and trusted space for storytelling. Why do you think that is? Like, why are we seeing such a big growth, and why should we be paying attention to that as communications folks or people who want to be in a podcast?
Yeah, I think what we've been seeing is that traditional media, right? That's not where people are getting a lot of the information. I think there's many things that will report to saying that people are getting their information from podcasts, from YouTube. They're not watching regular TV as much as they did in the past or reading papers. They're going into these other spaces. So if we want to get our message across, if anybody wants to get their message across or be positioned as a thought leader, you're missing out if you're not considering podcasts as a space to get that message across, because that's where eyeballs and ears are, right? Increasingly eyeballs. So you might also be noticing that a lot of podcasts are also now on YouTube. Like, it needs to be both. So that's one thing, is this is where people are getting their information. I don't remember if you mentioned this, Maricela, but if not, I'll reiterate. But this was the person that the Golden Globes gave an award for a podcast, which, by the way, please go listen to the latest episode with Claire Danes of the podcast that won that award, the Good Hang. Anyways, that's a really fun podcast, but that just shows you, like, okay, like, it's no longer like a fringe thing that, like, NPR listeners that then go listen.
Now.
It's like people are legit or illegit in many ways too. It's
true.
Also a space where there aren't those journalistic standards, so you still have to be very savvy in how you consume that media, but it would be a mistake to ignore it as a place. It has to be part of your strategy to get on a podcast if you really want to get your message across. And I would love, if Michelle and Joaquin want to add anything to that about why we ought to pay attention to podcasts. I mean, please do.
I would say that it's an important distinction and caveat with podcasts. Like, unless it's NPR and you know that you're listening to something, not necessarily NPR, but unless it's from a journalism source, like, podcasts are part comms, part podcasts. And so there's a lot of branded content disguised as breaking news. And so you really do have to be discerning as a consumer of podcasts to know if the information has been vetted. And it's like, it is a extraordinary medium to communicate alternative facts. So you definitely have to be careful, because it's not always journalistic.
Yeah. And Michelle, do you want to add anything, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything that everyone said. I do think that the way in which people are consuming information is constantly evolving and changing. And so we are seeing kind of like a new demographic of people who have very specific niche interests that they like tap into podcasts for. So, like, I think the best example of this is, like, for example, like that really popular crime junkie true crime podcast, right? Everyone listens to that. I remember listening to that back when I still lived in Chicago, and it was like a relatively unknown thing, but they tapped into the interest of a very specific target audience. I also listened to this other podcast called How Did This Get Made, about how terrible movies get produced and made. And it's, again, such a niche target audience, right? So there's such an oversaturation of news, whether it's podcasts or, YouTube channels, whatever it is, that you have to be really intentional when it comes to the creation of your podcast about who your target audience is and who you're trying to communicate your message to.
No, and that's true. That's interesting, Michelle, that you bring that up because it's if you represent a brand or if you have your own brand, you have the choice to do the research and say, okay, this is the audience that I want to reach. This podcast reaches that audience, so I'm going to pitch that podcast versus just doing a blanketed approach of trying to pitch everyone, and it just wouldn't make sense. So, similar to traditional media, you have media like the sports publications or education publications. I'm sure that's the same thing with the podcast as well. So, Joaquin, from your perspective, what makes the podcast different from a traditional or digital media when it comes to the narrative and the audience connection? Is it similar? Do you see big differences?
Well, it seems like with podcasts, there's an implied intimacy. You're getting to hear either just their voice in like a
Mhm.
space where it's just you and this moderated conversation, or you're getting to look at a very yeah, nowadays, as Brenda said, mentioned, like eh, there's always a video component, even though kind of at the beginning of podcasting where we came up, it was sort of like, you don't need a video unless there's something to show on the video. Like, but now we
Mhm.
want to see both sides of the conversation. I think that's came out of the two-way conversation podcast that got really popular, which unfortunately a lot of them are pretty like conservative echo chamber voices, but um the, the opportunity with a podcast is to really feel like you're connected to the guest and to the host. So it's nice when the host is somebody that has clout or is recognizable and is somebody that is a trusted member of a community. And that way it's a very intimate conversation. And for the listener or for the viewer, it's an opportunity to um, participate passively in like a deep dive that's going to cover a little bit more than maybe a traditional radio interview that might be 2, 3 minutes. It's a long,
Yeah.
like a podcast is a long time to listen to anybody do anything.
Mhm.
20 minutes is a short podcast, you know. Some of these podcasts are 2 hours, and you have to really know your audience if you're going to be, on our end, you have to really
Entertaining them for two
yeah,
hours.
you need to be able to like hold their attention. And
Attention.
conversely, somebody who's listening needs to really be discerning because there's so much out there. You really want to make sure you're spending your time wisely. There's like you really can't listen to all the stuff out there. Every day people are cranking stuff out.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
it provides like an, you know, not that edited and pretty direct line to the listener understanding kind of complexer nuances from maybe a story that they're somewhat familiar with, but they get roped in by seeing like, oh, this is a way to get to learn more about what Dolores Huerta has been doing in her activism, and like, oh my God, she's 95. That's crazy. Um, you get to like learn a lot about a specific person and their personality. I think that's like not always there in radio, and it's certainly not there in print,
Yeah.
and it's a little
Mhm.
non-traditional.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so for broadcast and print media interviews, from experience, like when we're pitching media, or like you're mentioning, like traditional media, you pitch the story to the reporter after you vet the reporter and figure out this is a reporter we want to pitch. Your client gets interviewed, the story runs either that night or the following day or a couple of days after. But with podcast, that process is different. And what is the lead time that you need, which for this? So if we want to pitch a story to you and like, what is the lead time? So if you could walk us through, so we'll start with Joaquin, you can just, since we were pretty much talking about that, what is that lead time?
Um, for a show like ours, we are flexible. So if it's something that seems like, especially with every 2 weeks,
Mhm.
if it's something that seems like it's really important, we had a show scheduled that was evergreen, and then
Mhm.
the Venezuela stuff happened. So we are like, let's get someone who can speak to the, um, what's happening on the ground in Venezuela, and we kind of fast tracked their episode. So we're able to turn it around pretty fast. It kind of depends on the show, but
Okay.
we'll sit on some evergreen stuff that's for a month or for several weeks. But if it really is something that's breaking and extremely relevant and pinned to like something very current, then it might be as simple as it's going to air on our next show, which is in 4 days. It
Mhm.
doesn't take that much production to get a podcast out there.
Yeah, I think that's true for certain podcasts, like for us as well, for Tamarindo. Like if it's something that's very pressing, it's easy. If it's exciting for us, if it's like a big get or something very timely, like we can pivot and get it done. But typically we do plan many weeks in advance. We have an idea, and there's many podcasts that might actually pre-record all of their. They have like a 2 days where they pre-record everything. So I guess the key thing is to know the podcast, right? Know, like listen and see, oh, do they tend to have segments where they can squeeze in something that's timely? And we, in a way, we do both because we pre-record a lot of the interviews, but we always do the banter piece right before the episode comes out. So that's our opportunity to talk about something timely. And we have done like little mini interviews in those timely spots. So again, I think the key thing to understand is that it depends. It depends. Yeah, so do try to pitch us many weeks in advance if you know that something's coming up. Let's say you have an important report that you know is coming up 2 months from now. Pitch that podcast today, even if it's going to happen in 2 months. Or I'll give you an example of a recent pitch that we didn't plan to have this guest on, but their pitch was so great. So the pitch was like, hey, Bad Bunny is going to be on the Super Bowl. Here's a Puerto Rican person that can talk about the why this matters. So timely, because that's coming up. The Super Bowl is right around the corner, and the purpose of that pitch was to promote that person's podcast. And guess what? I'm going to say yes because people are going to want to know about commentary about Bad Bunny. So because it was timely, I'm going to do it. And what do they get? They get free promotion for their podcast because they found a timely hook that made sense for us. So just to give you an example.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Whereas a show like Latino USA, they have their production calendar several months out. So if you're pitching something to like a show like that, you have to know that it's going to take them a long time to produce it, and that they're not going to air it until like they're not doing breaking news. They're doing deep dive, investigative or narrative stuff, and that's going to take longer.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Coming from the journalism world, right? Like a lot of the pressure that we feel in the newsrooms is around the quickness of the turnover in our news cycles, right? It's like this new thing is happening, this and we're in a political climate where there are things happening every single day. So I think one of the challenges for me coming into kind of like the podcast space is I'm like a lot greener than some of the folks here, it really grounding myself in the understanding that podcasts are not usually breaking news like outlets, right? Like that's not how people learn about breaking news things. And we can obviously tackle topics and bring in guests that are relevant, but for the most part, what you want to do is establish like a season, right? A season where you have your ideal guests, your list of guests that you would want to bring in there, people who are realistic that you know for sure you can book, and then, like Brenda said, like pinpoint some of those important dates that you know ahead of time are going to be relevant to what's happening in that moment. But one of the things that has worked in my favor is that I work with a team, right? I work with Joaquin, I work with other folks. So when there is something that's like very current and relevant, I get to turn to my team and say, who do we know collectively? Like, what are our collective resources? So even as you're thinking about that, like, who do I want to work with? That becomes sort of like an important, like, building point towards how you want to structure your season.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Um, you can have a really good pitch where I've received pitches where it says, this is this person, here's who they are, here's the topics that they can add value to. And maybe I don't have space for them right now, but I literally have a little folder that says pitches. Later on, maybe something will happen that's breaking news where, oh yeah, I remember there was that person that's a subject matter expert on X. So that even if you don't have something right now that's timely, even just sharing with a podcast that you want to be on, the type of topics that you can be an expert on, the value that you can add, you at least get on their radar. And it may not be now, it may be in a couple of weeks, but that's another takeaway that I have from kind of the example you shared is like sometimes there's something comes up and you're thinking about who can we bring on, and if you already are on that podcast radar, it'll make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, and that leads me into the next question of like, what are the top 2 or 3 must-haves that people need to include in their pitch? Like that signals to you, this guest or topic will work in my show. Is there anything that when we're pitching you, is there something that we should be keeping in mind in that pitch that's going to draw your attention and say, oh, okay, I think I want this person?
Yeah, I'll give you some things that I like to see in a pitch. I like to see what they're an expert on. I like to see examples of what they could speak about. That makes it really easy. I like to see their social media handle, because honestly, I need it. If they have a good social media presence, that's going to help me because
Right.
then for me, because I also want people to I want to lift up Tamarindo's profile. So if we can, if there's someone that also has a big platform, we could collaborate on a social media post. I know that it's going to get more listens. So that matters to me.
Attraction. Mhm.
But also too, let's see what else. I think those are the social media handles, the topics they could add value to. Oh yeah, here's another one. Sometimes I want evidence that they're good on a podcast. So sometimes I've seen pitches that said, here's an example of 3, this person's been a guest on these 3 podcasts. That also helps me as well. So those are the things that I like to see in a pitch, but I definitely want to see what Joaquin and Michelle also like to see.
I can jump in. I think it is definitely a benefit to have your own following when you're going on a podcast. Because that is gonna signal to us that we're gonna get more listens from your profile elevating ours. That said, you don't have to, and if you don't, then make sure your idea is something that you think will really resonate with. The better you know our audience, the more you can tailor a pitch that will resonate with them. So you want to, you don't want to cast a super wide net and blast the same pitch to a bunch of different organizations. You'll probably want to tailor it to each place and demonstrate that you have a little bit of knowledge of the type of stuff that we publish.
Yes, that's
I
a good
also
point.
we try to avoid, or not we try to avoid, but uh I think people pitching should try to avoid having a lot of inside baseball jargon from within their industry. A lot of times people are pitching and they don't really realize that it's reading like a PowerPoint or like a boardroom situation. You don't want to use buzzwords that are specific to your industry. You want to figure out a way to make your industry resonate across the board with a variety of outlets, and where our listeners going to find commonality, unless it's like a trade show podcast and you're pitching something that is super super niche to people who are tuning in because they're obsessed with it. But
And I'm sure, Joaquin, you can probably tell off the bat if somebody is familiar with your podcast when they send
yeah,
you those
I mean, it's
broad
cool to
pitches.
it's cool to demonstrate that you've listened to X, Y, and Z episode, or I really like Michelle as a new host. It just shows us that you care enough, at least one step enough to at least know a little bit about where you're pitching. Not that it's gonna be a red flag if you don't. If it's a great idea, it's a great idea. But it's definitely helpful to get in the door if you know where that door is going.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Can you walk us through examples of evergreen stories that make sense for a podcast? Because I know, Joaquin, earlier you mentioned that you have evergreen stories and then you have those that you can immediately step in and air for those breaking news.
So for our show, if we have like an artist on, like we had Lalo Alcaraz on, and his episode isn't necessarily like pegged to a current event, but he's sort of like, you know, he was honored with an award and he's like out here and a variety of media. So his, having him on there isn't necessarily doesn't have to air the week that it's recorded, but something like what's happening on the ground in Venezuela, or we recently put out an episode with Nicole Foy, who had done a study in October, and it's still relevant, but we had to go um, re-edit the interview so that we took out any mention of like last week or recently or you know, a lot has happened since her report about the number of people detained by ICE in October. There's been a lot of other ICE activity that is relevant, but that's still a really important story. So it's evergreen in the sense that that story needs to be heard, but it's not necessarily pegged to right now. So there's ways if we want to put your story out there, like we can tailor it to fit a more evergreen window, but um,
Mhm.
it's not always going to be the type of thing where we don't want to publish a story where the moment has passed.
Yeah, that's an excellent episode, by the way. Everybody should go listen to the latest episode of the Latino Newsletter. Fabulous example, right? The report came out a while ago, but it's incredibly relevant, right? Because it's about the increased arrest of citizens, which continues to happen. And what I learned is that it's been happening. That's what I learned in that by listening to that episode. It's been happening in many administrations. So it's not a new phenomenon. It's just one without guardrails now. So it's much worse. But yeah, I'd say evergreen things is, first of all, learn about the podcast when to be on. So we're pretty broad, and I think the Latino newsletter can be very broad as well, because we're at the end of the day, we're about Latino empowerment. We're about lifting the issues that impact the Latino community. We're about inspiring action. So that's pretty broad. So find out where you plug into those things, and that you are evergreen. So yeah, that would be the key thing, is just know where you are trying to get on and make that connection, make that connection where you fit in.
Yeah, I would add to kind of counter what everyone said, not counter, but to provide like a contradictory example of something that like would turn me away from a pitch.
Oh, yes.
I think like what Joaquin mentioned, if you have a lot of like almost just like PR sounding, just very like media advisory, that gives me pause. I also don't want to have a guest that's just promoting an institution or an organization or selling something, right? I've had, situations where, for example, like someone just sold a book or wrote a book. And I think I'm open to that. But what I don't want is just for this to be like a marketing ploy for you, right? And you just have to be really careful about that, because a lot of times people will pitch something and it sounds like they want to be a guest and talk about a topic. And then you realize they've been campaigning for X, Y, and Z. And like, so, when people make a pitch or request to be on the show, I like to do a little bit of digging. And if I'm hesitant and I have thoughts about it, I'll send it to the team and I'll be like, hey, what is this about? Like, has anyone heard about this? Because I trust the judgment of my team members as well.
Well, and especially with Michelle being from a journalist background as you are, you're not out here to like make a fluff piece for somebody. Like we don't that's not what our platform is. And, we exist to uplift other platforms. That's kind of like the amazing thing about podcasts is we'll have a journalist that did something awesome and we'll bring them on our show and we'll say, this is a really important thing and kind of break that down. So we don't want to like give a platform to somebody who isn't putting in all the legwork behind that because at the end of the day, it's journalism.
And I want to say a couple of things about that too. One, we've had a lot of really incredible guests that I've learned a lot from, that I've, am soaking in information that they're giving me throughout the podcast. But there's also people that I've disagreed with and I'll push back on a little bit and I'll ask, follow-up questions like, if this is your stance on this, then what about this? And so I think, being able to have that, I don't want to call it conflict, but just disagreements in that space are also encouraged, because then you have really like exciting conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
So just leaning in on that, a lot of people here in the audience are going to be pitching you or pitching a podcast. So what are some of like the pet peeves or don't do that's just going to turn me off? I'm just going to delete your email or like how can you like are there any tips to help us who want to get our client or our brand or our message on your podcast? So any tips on that?
Well, I guess I'll give a pet peeve and then I'll, lots of tips. But I guess the pet peeve, because sometimes we get a lot of pitches for books, and you could tell, first of all, it's like not even an author that makes sense for us. So like the blanket PR pitches, delete immediately. But I think also sometimes there's pitches that don't really even have an ask. They just tell you about someone but they're not even, it's not clear, okay, what do you want me to do with this? So, be clear and transparent about your ask. And like, I know we've been talking about a lot of, pitches, and pitches are the best way to get on a podcast for free. But the interesting thing about podcasts and these content creators, increasingly so, is that it's not journalism. So maybe there are paid opportunities. So that's the other thing to explore, is like maybe there are paid opportunities with some podcast sponsorship opportunities. Go ahead, Michelle.
So I wanted to say, someone had asked about like pitches. First of all, so the pitch I would describe, and feel free to jump in here, as a like general idea, right? Like, this is the pitch. This is what I want to come in and discuss. This is the subject or the topic. The angle, I think, is the thing that I am looking for, right? And the angle is like, this is my area of expertise, and this is the discussion. I mean, it's an angle, right? Like it's a discussion point that I'm wanting to hone in on and like bring some level of expertise to the discussion about, right? So if you can like really hone in on the angle piece of it, I think that'll help, potentially convince someone that this might be a good subject to dive into. I think for me, and I can't speak for everyone else, I like it when people come in with like some options, right? Like, hey, I'm an expert in this. We can talk about this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And if two of those things make sense to me, great. If only one of those things makes sense to me, great. But at least now you've given me a range of options for things that you are, or you feel equipped to discuss.
Great point. And also we want to know that you're equipped to discuss it, why you're the person to have on our show to talk about that particular topic. But we also, we don't want, we want to know why our show. To Brenda's point, if someone's sending out a blanket or like a boilerplate pitch to a bunch of places, it's going to be obvious when it's just not the right fit. And it's sort of like, why am I getting this spam email with hashtag podcast on it, so it's not like, it doesn't have to be tailored to us, but like, if you know that it's a good fit, then tell us why not only is it a good fit, but why you're the person to talk about that, and why is now the time to talk about that, or why would it be evergreen? Because there's an advantage to having an evergreen story too. If you're like, this is something that will not get old, this is a story that resonates on these levels, because not only is it something that is happening in current events, but it's a cultural groundswell that we're highlighting here. Why, what are the advantages to going with this story, and when is also kind of key. It doesn't have to be right now, but I want to know why you think it should be either now or is evergreen.
Great. All right. So I think this is a lot of great content. We're getting into the Q&A part of our conversation. I know the people have been putting questions on the chat.
In the chat, yeah, that's the place.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go with Mashi Neeson. Her question is, what should creators or professionals understand about modern consumption habits if they want to stay relevant? And can you share how podcasts are monitored or measured as media, for example? Because I think like for us, like in the PR world, we have to say this podcast reaches X amount of people, and blah, blah, blah. So what are some of the metrics that you're able to provide or with your podcast? Do you offer that?
Well, we offer that when you're going to pay me. when we get to that point, then we pass you on to our podcast network, who then negotiates and tells you things like impressions.
Mhm.
You know, that's basically, as far as I know, that
Okay.
happens. But yeah, I don't know if it's different with Joaquin and Michelle for the Latino newsletter.
Yeah, I mean, what we measure is impressions for sure.
Okay.
We're pretty small, and we
Okay.
started pretty recently, so it's not like we're going to guarantee that you get X number of downloads or whatever. But we'll
Mhm.
guarantee that our listeners or readers of the Latino newsletter will have your episode kind of blasted out there. But in terms of metrics, like I feel like if you're pitching to a small nonprofit news outlet, you're not necessarily going to get like uh
Mhm.
huge amount of listens uh above and beyond. It's not going to make or break your career as a podcast guest, you know what I mean? Um
Yeah, I want to
we
add a couple more things, but go
impression
ahead after
no,
after you.
impressions is basically what we're focused on.
It
Not
really
even
depends on who is your audience, like you guys were sharing and on everything. Like you really the podcast is based on the audience. They need to know you as well. So they would follow a podcast that is interest to the audience. So the audience that you build, it's gonna come really organic. It sounds like you don't
at,
really have.
at our stage, what we're doing is pretty organic, and that's why we're looking to have relatively high profile guests, but if not, people that are doing important stuff. Because right now, we're hoping clicks will come organically out of publishing important, newsworthy content that is relevant and resonates within the Latino community.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
would like, what I was going to say too is like, sure, there's impressions, but there's people that well, then you now you have this link right now, you can always put it on your website. As I've appeared on these many podcasts, so it adds legitimacy to you as a speaker, or to your organization, or you as a subject matter expert. So I think there's things beyond like plays that has value. And in the past, we've had, like, for example, financial coaches or life coaches, and they've gotten business, or like, oh, somebody found me from your podcast, from that episode that I did with you. So there's other things that are a little bit more difficult to measure, but that still have an impact.
So I
Mhm.
want to add one more thing to this. And this is not even an example of what the Latino newsletter has done yet, but I want to give a shout out to like Locutora Radio, who has really tapped into not only a really specific audience around like Latinas, femmes, like kind of like millennial age women, current issue, people who care about current issues. But what they've done is they've developed obviously like a really strong social media following, but they've also implemented themselves in the community. So if that's something that you're like thinking about, right, as you're like trying to figure out what are my metrics for success, is it just going to be clicks? Is it just going to be views? Like also think about like the communities that you're answering to and how you can make yourself present in those communities. And I know Locutora Radio has been around for a while and they have like lots of sponsorship and support now, but they've also had like in-person events and they've created and fostered spaces where people can come and convene. And so, you know, depending on what your audience is and what kind of format you guys are thinking of using as you're creating the idea for your podcast, think about like what sorts of physical events, spaces you guys can like embed yourself in as well.
Mhm. And I think, Brenda, I think you were also out doing like a live stream
Oh yeah, we've done
podcast.
several events. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've done several events. We started the same year as Locatora, just a few months before them. But yeah, we've done workshops on how to start a podcast. We've done those kind of like an annual basis, but we've also just done like a lot of like cultivating friendship events. We've done retreats. This is our third year doing an actual leadership retreat. So yes, I don't know if folks that are watching this are also potentially thinking about starting a podcast, but yeah, these are some of the things that could stem out of that.
Mhm. And then someone asked, like, after an episode is released, so like on your podcast, does it fade away? Or I'm assuming that you just keep the links on there, right? So people can
Yeah,
continue
lives
sharing it.
forever. Yeah, so it lives forever on
Mhm.
the internet. As long, so yeah, so it's there forever. So yes, you could have that link. I mean, until that podcast decides to stop being on, you know,
Mhm.
whatever host you have to, when you have a podcast, you pay for a host and then that host puts it on all the places. So unless your podcast ends, but like for us, we have like 250 episodes that you can listen to right now. Like they're still there forever. So that link that's what I was kind of getting to it, that you can always point to that. Or if the conversation was fantastic, you can have that link on your website. Like it could always be something that you can point to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and on top of that, it'll get buried in the feed over time, but you can always choose timely instances to put it back out there if it's something that really still resonates, like something having to do with immigration reform. Like the more context we get in real time, the more prescient previous interviews actually wind up being, because
Mm-hmm.
we're piecing this together as we go.
Great. So when just to wrap it up, because I know we're running out of time. So when we're pitching you for our guest or ourselves to be on your podcast, it's usually the process is that we'll send you an email and then we'll just wait to hear back from you or follow up with you. I'm assuming that you're probably getting hundreds of pitches a day. How do we find out whether there's interest or not, or how often can we stalk you on social media and send you DMs on Instagram?
Don't do that.
If we're seeing
Emails.
that, if we're seeing that, hey, they're not getting back to me, how can we find out if there's interest or not? Or if we hear
I mean, I
crickets,
think,
does that mean
well,
there's
for
no
instance,
interest?
for us, we even have a place on our website that says, "Hey, we always welcome pitches, but we can't get back to everyone." So,
Mhm.
but yes, but the other thing is that I pretty much do 95% of all of it by myself. So I do appreciate when you follow up because most of the time it's not because you're not the right fit or you're not relevant, it's because I need a follow-up email. But as long as you have those key things that we mentioned, just the things that we mentioned, like make sure you make it clear that you know the podcast you're pitching to, that you provide some examples of what you can add value to, including angles, that you include your social media if you want, but sometimes like there are things that are more like I've had a lot of professors that are fabulous speakers. They don't have a social media presence, but they're fantastic and they're going to add value. So I'll have them, even if they don't have a social media. So, but those would be the ingredients to have. And yes, especially if you feel strongly that it's a good fit, of course, follow up.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely with us, follow up too.
Yeah,
We're,
I mean,
we're not getting hundreds of pitches a day.
yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, I don't want people to think I am overwhelmed in emails, so I do feel like sometimes I get lost in, the inbox. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say maybe I'm a little different. If I miss an email or if someone can't contact me, I appreciate when someone gets on, Instagram or text message and says, "Hey, like I've been trying to track you down," because I'm a busy person. So I know that's not everyone's MO. But I think for me, it's helpful if I have different public accounts where people can like contact me. And usually the ones that are public are the ones people are allowed to contact me in. If I'm private, like don't, yeah.
Yeah, read the room is another thing. Like, don't if you're gonna slide into a DM with a pitch, like make sure that it comes across as like, hey, we've really been trying to reach you, and I really think you should consider this pitch because it's like a really good fit. And I sent an email, and then I'll be like, oh, let me go check my email.
Yeah, it's helpful if you've contacted someone I already know, like, hey, this person said I could reach out or, something like
Okay.
that.
Okay, great. Well, let's see, we're at that time, but I want to thank our panelists. Thank you for joining us, and this is a great conversation. Just for all of the people that participated and attended, we'll be sending a slide or
Well, we're going to put
with their
this on our
contact
YouTube.
information.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Or if
So
Michelle and Joaquin want to put the contact information in the chat
yeah.
of where we folks can pitch the Latino
Mhm.
newsletter, that'd be great.
That'll be
I
helpful.
also want to say, if you want to start your own podcast, start your own podcast. That's awesome. That way you'll think about what goes into making a podcast, and it might actually make your pitches better, but it'll also just give you practice at creating a platform that is exciting and entertaining for other people. I don't ever discourage people from making a podcast because some people have a really great idea and
Mhm.
I don't need to sign off on it. Like, do your thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
Mhm.
you know, a lot of work goes into it. So be ready to
Yes.
have a job that doesn't pay any money for the first 5 years, you know.
Exactly. Or 10. Yes.
All right. All right, everyone. Thank you. And again, this was sponsored by VPE Communications, and there's our contact information. As I mentioned earlier, we're a Latina-owned full-service PR agency. So feel free to reach out to us, and looking forward to having more of these conversations. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to our guests.
Thank you so much.
Bye.